Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Coffee and Podcast, where specialty coffee means so much more. We are on a quest to cultivate freedom for victims of human trafficking, all while drinking some really great coffee. I'm your host, Philip Klayman. I'm also one of the founders of Three Tree Coffee in Statesboro, Georgia. January is National Human Trafficking Prevention Month. And on today's episode, we discuss the importance of raising awareness about this trafficking problem. Joining us today is Kate Templeton, who's the outreach coordinator for Tharros Place, which is a safe house in Pooler, Georgia. At Three Tree, we've been supporting Tharros Place for a few years now and love their mission to cultivate a culture of courage among trafficking victims in the Savannah and surrounding areas. In her role, Kate is constantly thinking about mobilizing others towards this cause. So I couldn't be more excited to have her on today to share more about that. So Kate, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thanks so much, Philip, and thanks so much to Three Tree for all the support of Tharros Place. Three Tree really has been a major supporter since day one of Tharros Place, since we opened in December of 2023, and even before when we were, organizing our residential program and starting to get everything ready.
Absolutely. Well, it is worth supporting. And a quick background for some of our listeners, we actually had Julie Wade on the podcast a while back, about a year and a half ago. But she is one of the ones who pioneered Tharros Place. And we were so pumped to see this come to our area. We couldn't believe it. We were so excited that we were able to have that resource in our community and support that resource. So, Kate, let's learn a little bit more about you. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, of course. So, as Philip mentioned, my name is Kate Templeton, and I am the outreach coordinator for Tharros Place. I am originally from Savannah, Georgia, so I'm really excited to be back serving the community that I love so much. I graduated with my undergraduate degree in public health education, and promotion from the University of Georgia, and then the following year got my master's in public health from UGA as well. I was kind of planning on moving to New York City and doing a big public thing situation there, but the cost of living and the public health salaries really weren't matching up. And so somebody actually sent me this job with Tharros Place. It was a brand new nonprofit. I would be the first employee if I got the job. And so I was like, you know what? My youngest brother's still in high school. It'd be really fun to come back home for a while. So I applied, and it literally has been perfect. It's been really meaningful to get to serve the community in this way. I think growing up in Savannah, I didn't really realize that trafficking was such a big issue here. And I'm sure we'll talk about it more in a moment, but there are just a lot of reasons that trafficking is, kind of flourishing in this area. And as Philip mentioned, it really wasn't something that was talked about. In the past, people referred to children who are victims of trafficking as child prostitutes. And now we know that that is just not a correct term. That is not even something that should ever be said, because these children are victims. So just kind of recreating a narrative about what these children have experienced and really trying to find ways to support them in our community is super important to me.
Absolutely. And then you said you're employee number one, and that's a pretty huge testimony to you
Yeah.
and to Tharros Place that you're still there. That means you're doing a great job and you clearly love working there. So that's pretty amazing to hear.
Thank
You
you.
mentioned that you were in public health for some time. What was it maybe about human trafficking that really got your attention? Or do you remember a moment where it was like, oh, this is something maybe I want to focus on with my career? Or was it really just opportunity opened up and that's how it moved forward?
Yeah, so it's kind of a mixture of both, actually. So, all of my undergrad and graduate degree, when I was working on it, I always did sexual health and health education and sexual health education as my, papers and projects that I was doing, because that was something that was really important to me. And I was fortunate enough to go to a school that was, pretty open about teaching us about sexual health education and stuff like that. But I had so many friends in my public health degree that just received no sexual health education. You basically told them like abstinence is the only option and didn't tell them about anything else. And I think that is so destructive, because if people don't know how to prevent certain things, then they can't, live their life to the fullest and know all of this information. So I felt like it was kind of my path to share sexual health information and stuff like that in the community. So I actually wanted to do program planning and create curriculums for schools to teach sexual health. So It was kind of a mixture of both because I knew I was interested in that type of field. And then when I saw this job advertised for Tharros Place, I was like, you know what? That really is a perfect mix of what I want to do, going out into the community, educating parents, students, teachers, law enforcement, healthcare professionals, literally anybody about a topic that really is not talked about very much. And I think so many people feel uncomfortable talking about human trafficking or talking about sexual health and stuff like that, that I didn't feel uncomfortable talking about that. So I knew that, maybe I should be the person to be able to do this. And I think part of it is because my parents were really open with me. If I ever had a question, they always said, come ask me instead of look it up online and stuff like that. So I think that was really helpful in kind of creating my path and where I
Mm,
wanted to take my career.
absolutely. And then you also mentioned that you grew up in Savannah, and I would say kind of understandably, maybe growing up, when I was growing up, I wasn't aware of these issues. But then as you get older, you start realizing, wow, there's things happening around me that I had no idea that were even going on. And you mentioned that there's lots of reasons why Savannah is maybe even a hub, or there's a higher risk of trafficking there. What are some of those reasons that you've found? Why is Savannah or areas like that possibly a hub or a higher risk for trafficking situations?
Great question. So the highest at-risk group is actually runaway and homeless people, and we have a lot of runaway and homeless youth living in Chatham County, and about 60% of minor survivors of trafficking are runaway and homeless youth. So we know that that is a big concern. We also have an international port, which is the third busiest in the country, and I heard someone say recently that it's now number one in the country for busy ports. And a lot of people think that that's an issue for human trafficking because they envision, people in those large container ships coming over from other countries. And I always tell people that's not what we're seeing. The ports are an issue because anytime when there are a lot of people in one place, it puts the people in that place at risk. So that's why I-16 is a risk, the international airport, the St. Patrick's Day parade, when there are just a lot of people in one spot, it puts the children and adults in those places at risk.
Mm,
So those are kind
wow.
of the main reasons. And I think, yeah, it's just people don't know what trafficking is. I think a lot of people think of it as, you're pumping gas and a creepy person in a big white van pulls up behind you and like snatches you. And then, you're forever a victim of trafficking. But what we're seeing in Chatham County is runaway and homeless youth being victimized basically for basic needs. So what we're seeing is, say, a 14-year-old is homeless and doesn't have food, doesn't have shelter, and then somebody's offering that in exchange for a sexual act, that would be considered trafficking because anyone under the age of 18 legally cannot consent to getting anything of value for a sexual act, whether it's $500, a McDonald's Happy Meal, a new pair of shoes. Those are all cases that we have seen. Um, so that's kind
Yeah.
of what we're seeing, and that's not what people think of.
Absolutely. And that's fascinating hearing about runaways being such a high percentage of trafficking cases. That is eye-opening, right? And so much of it comes
Hmm.
down to um, kind of a dependency and desperation component of like if you put yourself in the shoes of a child who's run away, they've clearly severed some relationships and they've clearly severed some level of support, financial support. So they're
Right.
they're on their own, they're trying to figure out what to do, and suddenly they have these options that are incredibly unhealthy. Maybe they look more appealing at first, or maybe there's some
Hmm.
deception there, but then it go downhill fast, is what it seems like. Some
Definitely. And
cases can look like.
right. And sometimes even the situation with trafficking, as you said, may seem better to them than what they were experiencing at home because there may have been some abuse at home. There may have been, some lack of support. And then this trafficker is offering all of those things that the child so desperately wants, but in exchange for a sexual act. And that child might not see that as victimization. They might just see, oh, well, that's what I have to do, to get what I need. And there's also a statistic that says 1/3 of runaway youth will be approached by a trafficker within 2 days of leaving home. And that's always really jarring to me because it just shows that traffickers are looking out for vulnerabilities of our youth. So I always tell people it's important for us to also look out for those vulnerabilities so we can protect those youth extra.
So well said. So well
Thank
said.
you.
Okay, so let's talk about your role as outreach coordinator. The name says outreach, so clearly there's some level of you're reaching out. You are trying to get people to be aware of not just this problem, but also Tharros Place. So, kind of put us in your shoes. What is the day to day? What do you do in your role as outreach coordinator?
Yeah, so I always tell people I cannot imagine sitting at a desk all day. Like that's just not what I ever envision myself doing. So I really love my job as outreach coordinator because I get to basically venture into a new place in the community every day, every week. So when I started, basically I was cold calling other nonprofits. I was calling businesses and hospitals, law enforcement offices, schools, basically begging them to let me, practice my program to them and share information about what Tharros Place was, what human trafficking was. And we were pretty successful that first year. But again, it was really just getting our foot in the door. And then it, slowly built up. We had a lot of events for Tharros Place. And so now basically different organizations are actually calling us requesting these programs, which is really, really exciting because I was like, oh, I'm doing a good job. The people are liking the information that they're hearing. They think it's valuable. So I think since August of 2022, we've talked to about 16,000 people in Chatham County and the surrounding areas. In 2025, our goal is to get into the other surrounding counties like Effingham and Long and Liberty. And so we're really excited. And honestly, anywhere who would welcome a presentation, we are totally more than happy to come and talk to them. So just really getting out into the community is my favorite thing. My favorite age group to talk to is actually students. I think a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to talk to a bunch of middle schoolers about sex trafficking, but I think they are always so invested in what I'm saying because I think they see things on TikTok, they see things on social media, but no adult has ever been like, hey, this is what's happening. This is how you can prevent it. So I think they all are really interested in listening just because nobody's been willing in the past or nobody's felt comfortable to talk to them about those certain situations.
Mm.
So
So,
I've
see,
I've really enjoyed it.
yeah, so it seems like some of your education has been focused directly towards children, helping them understand these issues. How often does that get to happen? Do you go to schools a lot, or what? Is it frequent? Is it not so frequent?
Yes, so it's pretty frequent. Some schools will say that they want me to just speak to their teachers, and then the teachers can kind of give the information to the students. Some schools will let me, come in and talk to the students. I went to one high school and talked to 400 students at one time. I went to a middle school and did 4 different groups of 150 students. And honestly, they've been super successful, and the kids have been really receptive. I think a lot of the schools that I haven't been able to present to yet are I'm not able to because they're a little hesitant on, how their students will do in those types of presentations, but overall it's been really successful and I think it's so important to talk to our youth about this because they're the most likely to be victimized because, as adults we could potentially be victims of trafficking, but we know what trafficking is, we know what healthy relationships look like, but at 14, we might not know what that looks like. So really
Yeah.
directly talking to the students is so important because they can hear it from adults. But I think if someone directly comes to them, shows them a presentation about what it looks like, and I have a lot of videos about real world situations that happen with trafficking. I think so many times they see TikToks of someone walking around Walmart and they're like, oh no, I'm going to get abducted by the person in that van over there and stuff like that. And that's just not what we're seeing because I always tell the students it's so much easier to manipulate someone who trusts you than it is to try to abduct somebody, from a store or the park or the mall or something like that. So it's typically traffickers are people involved in that person's life well before their situation with trafficking. So I think a lot of people just don't realize that. So have, you know, um, they don't have their head wrapped around what trafficking truly looks like in the community.
Yeah, and with 60% of trafficking situations being runaways, you'd think education towards youth is incredibly important. So it's amazing to hear that you have those opportunities. And I know we have a few teachers that listen to this podcast. And so even an encouragement maybe to some of them to talk with their schools and see are there opportunities to bring this awareness and this education to children.
Mhm.
So then my next question for you is, you've been doing this for a few years now. Have you noticed any shift in maybe community perception to this problem, or even just maybe more people seem to know about it than before? Have you noticed a shift, or not so much? Has it stayed relatively the same?
I think there's definitely been a shift. I know when I first gave a presentation, somebody raised their hand after, my 30-ish minute presentation, and they said, well, that was really interesting, but I know this isn't happening in our community. And I'm like, well, it definitely is. It really is happening in our community. And we have seen reports, and we do know of victims, living in Chatham County. I also have somebody in another presentation really early on ask me, well, what's the difference between this and prostitution? So what's the difference between human trafficking and prostitution? And I tell them consent is the difference. And so I think just changing that narrative is really important. Again, when people would use child prostitute a lot, that's just simply not a term that is used anymore. And we know that those children are victims of trafficking. So I think there really has been a big community shift. And I think that is in part because of Tharros Place. And before Tharros Place, there was no residential facility within 90 miles of Chatham County. And Chatham County actually ranks sixth in the state for highest rates out of 159 counties for reports of trafficking victims. So I think just this Tharros Place opening, plus our outreach, plus community support like Three Tree and other local businesses and organizations has really created awareness about what trafficking is. Because again, I just think people didn't realize what it was before.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We train all of our new employees. We take them through a training on our mission just to explain why do we do what we do, and we talk about ending human trafficking. Why is that a part of our mission? And I remember for like the first at least 6 years of our business, I would always ask, "Have you heard of human trafficking before?" And most people would say, "I've never heard of it." Right? Yeah, I
Wow.
mean, maybe I've heard the term once or twice, and I have noticed a shift just in the past. I mean, I would say 3 years, especially. And so, hey, I'll give credit to Tharros Place. I think y'all are a big
Thanks.
part of it. I've noticed a big difference in the past 3 years, and I think just in general, our community is talking about this issue more. Where I'll start asking, "Have you heard of this before?" And they just immediately like, "Oh yeah, I've definitely heard of this. I've actually studied this in school, or I had someone come and speak to me about it at a
Hmm.
presentation." So really great to see that this sort of work is happening. And so I guess that kind of leads us to the thrust of the whole conversation of why we're doing this today and the purpose of raising awareness. What kind of role can that play? Why do you think that's so important when it comes to ending human trafficking?
Yeah, so I think awareness, I always tell people awareness and education is the biggest protective factor against human trafficking because if people don't know what it is, there's no way they can prevent it. If, a victim doesn't know what human trafficking is, there's no way they can make that report on what's happening to them. So I always stress like education is so important about trafficking because again, like we mentioned, people just don't know what it looks like. Again, they think of that white kidnapper van and that's the only option. And I always tell people there's not one look of a trafficker. A lot of people think that traffickers are just, older guys and young women that they're trafficking. And that is not the case. We know of so many cases of an older man and a younger boy or a woman and a younger boy. And so there's just not one look of a trafficker. I always show this slide during my presentations of maybe about 50 people that have been arrested for trafficking. And I tell people women actually make up about 30% of traffickers. So this idea that it's just men is completely false. And I think that really prevents boys from reporting as well because they just don't know that women can also be traffickers or that young boys can be victims of trafficking. I've tried to present to some schools and they said, oh yeah, you can definitely come present to our girl students, but our boys don't need to hear this information. And I'm always like, no, there are, cases in Chatham County of male victims of trafficking. Everybody needs to hear this because even if, none of the boys in that class ever become victims of trafficking, maybe their friend will from another school or maybe their sibling or something like that. So it doesn't hurt, to educate literally as many people as possible about this issue because as you were saying, people just don't realize how big of a problem it is in the United States. People think of it as something just happening in other countries
Yeah,
or big
would
cities. And
absolutely. When I first would think about awareness or raising awareness, I think early on, I would think it's kind of focused on more about more people know so that they can do something about this problem. But I think what you just said really hit something that seems true to me, and that's the power of prevention, right? It's not.
mm-hmm.
It's. I mean, hey, more people so that they can do something about it and support Tharros Place financially and do things about it. But there's a power to it as well of preventing it altogether because if people are aware of it before it even occurs, there's much less of a likely chance of them falling victim to this. And that even makes me wonder, does some of the education on prevention have to do with even runaways? That's a question. Like, is that ever a part of the presentation of maybe the risk of a runaway, or does that come up or does it not?
Yeah, a little bit it does. And we actually partner with a local youth homeless shelter. And when I went there the first time, I was like, runaway and homeless youth, are the highest risk. And so I said, is that okay if I mentioned it to these students? Because I didn't want to be triggering or anything. And they were like, yes, you definitely need to mention it because the youth that are at the highest risk need to know that this is something that is happening. So actually, when I give the presentation to any students, I always tell them at the end, I say, if you only take one thing away from my presentation, take away that you need to have one trusted adult and they need to be over the age of 18. And they need to be someone that you would trust if you had an issue that you thought you might be trafficked or a friend might. And I tell them it can be a sibling, it could be a parent, it could be, someone in your community, a faith leader, a coach, a teacher. I'm like, it doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't have to be a parent because some people are uncomfortable talking to their parents about these types of things. But I tell them as long as they have one person, that's really what they need because so many kids just feel like they don't have anybody to talk to, and just being that person is important. And then, kind of on the other side of that, when I give the presentation to adults, I always say, be a trusted adult, be somebody in the lives of children that they can talk to and they can come to, even if it's not your own children, even if it's some random child in the community that feels comfortable to you with you. Just make sure you're a person who's there and is supportive of the youth in our community.
Mm, great. All right. So let's kind of land the plane. I guess I got two more questions for you.
Okay.
The first one would be, what is one of the greatest challenges you've encountered in this large responsibility of how do we make this community aware of this and how do we educate? What's one of the greatest challenges you've seen?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think getting people comfortable with the conversation. I think, again, with sexual health or whether it's human trafficking or those types of subjects, people just feel uncomfortable talking about it. So at the beginning of my presentations, I always say, if you feel uncomfortable at any point, please feel free to get up and take a self-care break or look at your phone to try to block out what I'm saying. But then again, I stress it's so important to listen to this information because it really could protect you or the children in your lives or the people in our community. So I think that's kind of been my biggest thing. Just people are a little hesitant to listen just because it kind of makes them nervous or makes them stressed. And then I guess for schools, it would be some schools are a little not unwilling, but a little nervous to bring in a presentation, whether it's because the school doesn't want pushback for the parents or the parents are worried that the school won't let it happen or whatever the case is. I think that's just kind of the biggest thing. I just want to get out into the community as possible. So, kind of creating those partnerships with different community partners is really important because I've seen the more we present, the more people that we outreach to, then they ask for presentations and stuff like that. Because the first presentation I ever did actually was at a school. And once I could tell other schools, hey, we've presented at, this elementary school to these teachers, then they were like, oh, that school did it. Maybe I can do it now. Maybe it's, a legit presentation and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of been the hardest thing was the original getting that information out there. But I think now that we've educated about 16,000 people, people kind of know what Tharros Place is, I would hope. I think most people especially Chatham County, know about us and are open to those presentations. So,
Mhm. Yeah. That's it's I feel similar to when we started business, right? It's so hard to kind of get that initial exposure and branding and just getting the word out there, right? But once you kind of get that
yes,
first one under your belt, suddenly more people want to join in and are willing to listen more. And it really is all about trust, isn't it? Even in this context
exactly.
of, do people trust you and trust Tharros Place? And you can prove that over time as you have opportunities to share. So,
100%. Yes.
okay. And then lastly, what advice would you or resource would you offer to encourage our listeners if they want to learn more? A lot of people listen to this podcast because they want to learn more about Indian human trafficking. The coffee education part's fun, but there's a lot of resources for coffee education. There are not a lot of resources to learn about this. And so,
True.
what resource would you encourage people that want to learn more?
Yes. So we actually have a lot of resources on our website. It's tharrosplace.com. It's THARROS place.com. We have a ton of events. We actually have a community stakeholder meeting where people can come learn more about human trafficking. And we're actually our upcoming one, I believe, is March 12th on a Wednesday at Savannah Tech's Eckberg Auditorium. It's free to attend, and we have a speaker from the Department of Homeland Security coming to talk about their Blue campaign, which is a campaign to end human trafficking and how to support. There's also a human trafficking hotline, which I find amazing because it's really unique to the state of Georgia. It's specifically for the state, and it's run by the Children's Advocacy Centers of Georgia. You can remain completely anonymous. It's HIPAA compliant, and that's a great place where you can call and make reports and ask questions if you have them. But and the number is 1-866-END-HT, like human trafficking, and then GA, like Georgia. But Tharros Place is always open to questions. Our email is on our website and our phone number and everything like that. We also have a ton of volunteer opportunities. We have mentorship opportunities. We have volunteer opportunities like life skills classes. We want to make sure our participants get a lot of skills while they're at Tharros Place. So we had someone come in and teach them how to fix a bike. We had someone come in and teach them how to ice a cupcake properly. We had somebody come talk to them about resume building and how to start a savings account. So if you have any type of skill that you would like to teach, we are open to that. We have group volunteer activities, which Three Tree actually came and participated when we were starting our facility. We had a lot of Three Tree employees come paint and build furniture and stuff like that. And so we always have, yard work opportunities and things. So there's a lot of ways to get involved, and there are more resources on the website. But I did want to mention, if you ever come upon a victim of trafficking or think that somebody might be a victim of trafficking and you see them, in person right there, the best thing to do is call law enforcement, because we never want someone to approach a victim of trafficking because their trafficker could be dangerous either to the victim of trafficking or to the person making that report. So definitely calling law enforcement, and then they will make those connections to possibly get that child to Tharros Place if the placement is needed.
Well, we appreciate you sharing those resources. And Kate, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for what you do. And this was very eye-opening, and I hope our listeners got a lot from this today. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was super fun, and I'm glad to share about Tharros Place. And thank again Three Tree for their support.
Absolutely. Well, to all of our listeners, some of you may know this, some of you may not, but we donate $1 of every coffee bag that we sell to safe houses in our area. Tharros Place is one of our primary recipients of this Safe House Fund. Well, because January is Human Trafficking Prevention Month, we've actually upped that giving to $3 per bag that we sell. And we've come out with a new blend just for them. It was their idea. We loved it, called the Courage Blend. And so we have a new blend this month in January as well. So you can try a new coffee. You can support a good cause, $3 per bag. I encourage you to go check that out online or in our shops. And lastly, listeners, if there's one thing that really stood out to me today, it was the phrase, be a trusted adult. Be a trusted adult. If you're a parent, be a trusted adult. If you're a teacher, if you're a coach, if you're a community leader, if you're a religious leader, be a trusted adult. I think that's a really powerful statement to end on, because it really shows that there is something we can all do. Who are the children that are in your life that you can really be trustworthy for them and help them and empower them? As always, listeners, thank you so much for helping us cultivate freedom, and we'll see you next time.